Hello everyone, I'm Grandmaster Denes Boros, and today I'm going to look at a special game played between Magnus Carlsen and Alireza Firouzja from the first round of the Tata Steel tournament. Now, this game is very interesting because it kind of poses the big question: is chess the new poker? Let's take a look. So, this position is nothing new. We've seen this even in the 1970s. But what Carlsen is going to do with it will be something extraordinary. So the first move is fairly normal, rook c5, attacking the queen, queen f4, rook e5. Already kind of probing Firouzja's queen on f4 and cutting it off. So here, knight d7 is sort of a knee-jerk reaction by Firouzja, trying to chase the rook away, rook a5, knight f6, and now, as Carlsen managed to get the knight from c5 to a5, actually over defending those pieces, he is ready for a typical pawn sacrifice, the first bluff of the game, and that is d5. Now, d5 actually prepares plenty of ideas, most importantly to shut off that b7 bishop. Now, I am not extolling this move of d5. This was originally devised in 1969, believe it or not, by the man called Lev Polugayevsky, a legend of his own. So here, black does get a bad bishop for the sacrificed pawn, so I would call it sort of an educated bluff or guess. E takes d5, e5, knight e4, queen d4. And this is what grandmasters and super grandmasters are especially great at. They know how to centralize and how to create as much tension as possible. Also, he's making sure this bishop never gets out of this chain of pawns, and that will provide enough play for white. Rook c8, rook a1, a5. And a5 is a great move by the young Firouzja. He is planning to use that extra pawn and maybe even consider exchanging off this terrible bishop on b7. Rook b1. Now bishop a6 would be a little bit early because the d5 pawn is a target and white could just take it. So bishop c6. And here Carlsen realized that the odds are stacked against him, so it's time to get into a bit more complicated of a position. Also, from a psychological point of view, Carlsen has been a slump in the couple of months, and he is desperately trying to get back on track, and he decided that it is time to go all in, which is actually vintage Carlsen, as you might know from his match versus Karyakin. So e6. Again, another pawn sacrifice, but this time this is an original. He's saying, I'm giving you an extra pawn, so you will be up 2 pawns, not 1. But I will be able to activate my pieces. But again, in the same style of the Polugayevsky gambit, I am going to get some play against your king. And here, actually, I have to commend Carlsen and remind you that just because the computer does not like it does not mean it's not viable. But more about that later. F takes e6, knight e5. Still playing against this bishop, which is kind of walled in by its own pawns. Queen f6, avoiding this neat little trick of f3. If black would go a4, there's f3. And black is losing at least a piece, or a queen, but probably a piece. So Firouzja plays the logical queen f6, rook b6, playing against this bishop and setting up threats against the e6 pawn. Bishop e8, f3, knight g5, queen e3. And this is the big critical position. Oftentimes when you see commentary with very high level players, you see a couple of moves mentioned, but they sort of disregard all the other moves that are subpar. So whenever they're kind of claiming, or people are claiming the position is dead winning, it literally means that that couple of big moves can win you the game or potentially give you the advantage. But just like in poker, there are plenty and multiple options for black here. Multiple ways of looking at this position. And when you don't have the computer as an advisor, it is much, much harder to find a move. In fact, here Firouzja is in a big trouble and at crossroads. Has to decide whether he's going to go for his own counterplay trying to queen, which actually takes a lot of time. 4 moves, that's a lot of moves. Or try to stop white from playing knight g4. So if we figure it out from that perspective, either black stops it with h5 or moves the queen away, or starts moving the a pawn. Apart from these moves, the other moves are subpar and would create perfect chances for Carlsen. And that actually means that this is kind of a poker-like bluff. It's not totally unsound. It may seem unsound if you look from the perspective that you think you know all the solutions. But when you're in the heat of the moment, you might consider one of the two of the best moves and not consider the ultimate best one. So it turns out that a4 was an inaccuracy. The best move would have been either queen e7 or h5. But h5 is somewhat illogical. It does take away this square from the knight, but it does weaken the king. h4, knight h7, f4, knight f8, f5. And even though the computer says that this is fine for black, this is very scary if you don't have any computer backing you up that this is a-okay. And it also turns out, instead of knight h7, there is this very beautiful counter-sacrifice with knight e4, because if f takes, there's queen takes e5, and every endgame is good for black. So h5 would have been the best possible move here, but the other move would have been queen e7, f4, knight e4, takes, king h2, queen c5, rook b7. Now, this is a different situation, as white managed to get an active rook, aka a tractor, on the 7th. There are potential dangers for black. So it's not at all clear if black is winning. White definitely gets some counter chances, and the logical queen e3, rook e3 would run into the idea of rook g3, putting pressure on g7, and white just has enough play to hold the draw. And that kind of shows that when Firouzja decided to play a4, he had an abundance of options, but many of them seemed very risky and scary. And if you can't back it up, it's very hard to go for those decisions. Also, even if he would have played the most critical line, Carlsen would still have a chance to actually turn it around, because he would still have to continue playing very accurately. Knight g4, continuing the plan, attacking the pawn, kind of exposing that king on g8. Queen d8, rook takes e6. Not a hard move, but still a good one, because you want to undermine this king as much as possible. Knight takes e6, queen takes e6, and bishop f7 seems to be an oversight by Firouzja. However, king h8 would be still okay. Knight takes h6. You can't really take. You would lose the game because of queen h6, and the attack is decisive. But there is this brilliant move of bishop h5, which is very difficult to find. Knight g4, queen f8. Notice black should be sort of lurking around these squares, so there is no queen f5, queen h7 checkmate. So that does not happen. Rook e5, trying to eliminate this. Check. King f2, queen f7, queen d6, takes, rook h1, which is quite a brilliant way of defending against potential back rank mates and rook h5, bishop h7 ideas. And that kind of shows. And in this position, white still can go queen c6, and to be honest with you, I feel it is clearly a much easier position to play with white than with black. So even though the position would be roughly balanced, one slip would mean a loss for Firouzja here, even if he managed to find this line. But he played bishop f7 and sort of cracked under pressure. And after knight takes h6 check, which is a brilliant idea, g takes, queen takes h6, white has a mating attack. If black would just ignore, there's check, check, here, check, and checkmate. So Firouzja decides to try to counterbalance it, put the queen on c7, but that doesn't really help anything, because queen h8 check, bishop g8, queen h6 check, king f7 runs into checkmate, and queen g7 also ends in a mate after king f7, queen e7 mate. Therefore, after this check, black resigned, seeing the mate showing up on the board. So this kind of shows that chess can be kind of like poker. If you go all in at the right moments, it is very difficult for your opponent to find the right choices. Yes, it is in the pack. There is a possibility, and a greater possibility, of the opponent to win, but nobody really points it out to you, and there is only a handful of solutions here, and in the chess game that we just looked was just the example. It's not enough to have a chance to win, you've got to find them. So I really hope you enjoyed this mini lecture on the Carlsen-Firouzja game, and I hope to see your comments and likes if you loved this content. Thank you so much for watching, and see you next time.